You've probably heard about America's most famous serial killers, the ones shown in documentaries, the ones with movies made about them, the ones whose names became history. But there's another case, a case so disturbing that even people living inside the neighborhood didn't realize a serial killer was hunting women around them, because the victims were disappearing from a place where violence already felt normal, a place filled with abandoned houses, crack addiction, street prostitution, and people society stopped paying attention to. At first, nobody connected the deaths. Police thought they were isolated crimes. Residents blamed drugs. Families waited for phone calls that never came, but buried beneath the streets of Oak Park, something horrifying was growing quietly. And the most terrifying part? The killer didn't hide in shadows. He repaired houses, talked politely with neighbors, helped people, and even spoke calmly with police, while bodies were being discovered one after another. Now, we're entering one of Sacramento's darkest, forgotten cases, a case many people have never heard before, and a killer investigators believe may have murdered far more victims than anyone truly knows. June 1986, Sacramento, California. At first glance, the city looked peaceful. Quiet suburbs, fresh developments, families moving into new neighborhoods under the hot California sun. But a few streets away from downtown, Oak Park felt like a completely different world. After dark, the neighborhood changed. Streetlights flickered over cracked sidewalks. Empty houses stood abandoned with broken windows and rotting doors. Crack cocaine had flooded the streets so aggressively that violence barely shocked anyone anymore. And somewhere inside that chaos, women were disappearing. Most people didn't notice at first because the missing women were addicts, prostitutes, women who drifted in and out of the neighborhood for days at a time. Their disappearances blended into the noise of Oak Park until the morning of June 18th. A handyman arrived at a vacant property he had been renovating. The house was silent, except for the buzzing of flies somewhere deeper inside. Then he smelled it. A thick, rotting odor. At first, he ignored it. In Oak Park, strange smells inside abandoned houses weren't unusual, but the deeper he walked into the hallway, the worse it became. Heavy, sweet, unmistakably human. The man later said the smell reminded him of Vietnam, of death. He checked room after room until he reached a small bedroom closet, and when he pulled the door open, he froze. Inside was the decomposing body of a young woman curled unnaturally against the wall, partially undressed, hidden carefully in the darkness. And police were about to discover this was only the beginning. The victim's name was Yolanda Johnson. Most people in Oak Park knew her as Yo-Yo. She was only 22 years old. Before crack cocaine entered her life, friends said Yolanda had real talent. She worked as a cosmetologist and dreamed of building a stable future. But addiction destroyed everything, slowly. Then, all at once. Soon, every day became about survival. Finding money, finding drugs, finding the next high. And in Oak Park, prostitution became one of the fastest ways to feed addiction. Police investigating the vacant house quickly realized Yolanda had likely been dead for several days. Drug paraphernalia covered parts of the room, suggesting people had used the property as a temporary crack house. But something about the scene disturbed detectives. The body didn't look dumped randomly. It looked hidden, controlled, almost staged. There were signs of sexual activity nearby, but forensic technology in 1986 was painfully slow. Detectives collected biological evidence, yet DNA testing could take months, sometimes years. And outside Oak Park, almost nobody cared. To the media, Yolanda's death looked like another tragic ending in a dangerous neighborhood. No panic, no headlines, no urgency, but investigators kept circling back to one strange detail. The man who discovered the body had lied about his identity. At first, he introduced himself as Carl Patilla, but police soon uncovered his real name, Morris Solomon Jr. And when detectives looked deeper into his background, they found something terrifying: a history of violent sexual assaults involving prostitutes. Suddenly, the quiet handyman standing near the crime scene didn't seem so harmless anymore, but the most disturbing part? He remained completely calm during questioning. Almost too calm. When detectives questioned Morris Solomon Jr., something immediately felt strange, not because he acted nervous, because he didn't. He spoke softly, politely, like a man cooperating with police after stumbling onto something horrible by accident. But behind that calm personality was a disturbing criminal history stretching back years: previous sexual assaults, violence against women, attacks involving prostitutes, and yet somehow, Morris Solomon never looked threatening. That confused investigators, because serial predators often survive by appearing ordinary, and Solomon looked painfully ordinary, thin, quiet, almost forgettable. When police showed him a photograph of Yolanda Johnson, he admitted he recognized her from the neighborhood. He even admitted paying her for sex months earlier, but he denied killing her, denied seeing her recently, denied everything, and without hard evidence, detectives had little choice but to release him. Still, something about the case kept bothering them, because Oak Park already had rumors spreading through the streets. Women whispering about disappearing prostitutes, drug addicts who vanished and never returned. At first, people blamed the lifestyle. Maybe they left town. Maybe they got arrested. Maybe they overdosed somewhere. But by July 1986, another woman disappeared. Her name was Angela Polidori. Beautiful. Addicted. Known throughout Oak Park for chasing crack cocaine day and night. After being released from jail on prostitution charges, Angela spent the night smoking crack with friends before leaving with an unidentified man. Witnesses later remembered a pickup truck parked nearby. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. 4 days later, police received another call from Oak Park, another abandoned house, another terrible smell. And inside the basement, detectives found something that made their stomachs drop. The basement smelled like death before detectives even stepped through the door. It was July 20th, 1986. Outside, Sacramento's summer heat pressed heavily against the neighborhood. Inside the abandoned house, flies buzzed through stale air thick with rot and decay. Detective John Cabrera followed the odor downstairs. And there, hidden beneath debris in the corner of the basement, was the body of a woman, bound tightly with electrical cords, curled unnaturally on the floor, partially concealed as if someone had tried to hide her quickly before leaving. The victim was later identified as Angela Polidori, and immediately, investigators noticed disturbing similarities to Yolanda Johnson's murder. Both women were connected to prostitution and drugs. Both were discovered inside abandoned properties. Both scenes contained evidence of crack cocaine use, and both bodies appeared intentionally hidden. Now, detectives feared something much worse than random violence, a serial killer. But proving it was another problem entirely. No witnesses had seen the murder happen. No fingerprints connected anyone directly to the crime, and the neighborhood itself worked against investigators. People in Oak Park distrusted police. Witnesses disappeared. Drug users changed locations constantly. Fear and addiction kept mouths shut. Meanwhile, another unsettling detail emerged. The abandoned houses, connected to the murders, had both been renovated, or visited by the same man. Morris Solomon Jr. Again, the quiet handyman seemed to appear everywhere investigators looked, and still. He never panicked, never ran, never changed his routine, which made detectives even more uneasy. Because predators who feel safe are often the most dangerous. And while police struggled to connect the evidence, more women were already vanishing from Oak Park. By early 1987, detectives in Sacramento noticed something impossible to ignore. The missing persons files were growing. Most involved women connected to Oak Park. Most struggled with addiction, and many had histories of prostitution. One of them was Linda Vitella. Another was Cherie Washington. Another was Maria Apodaca. Different lives, different personalities, but all disappearing under eerily similar circumstances. Detective John Cabrera began reviewing case after case late into the night. The more he studied the files, the more the pattern terrified him. These women weren't simply leaving town. Something else was happening. Then came March 19th, 1987. Construction workers digging behind a repossessed house uncovered a buried piece of plywood. Curious, one worker cut open a black trash bag beneath it. A human foot emerged from the dirt. Police rushed to the property immediately. Buried underground was the decomposed body of a young woman tied tightly in a fetal position with electrical cords. Again. The victim was eventually identified as 18-year-old Maria Apodaca, and detectives soon uncovered a horrifying connection. The house where Maria's body was buried had once been connected to Morris Solomon Jr. Suddenly, everything changed. Investigators began revisiting every address tied to the handyman, every property he renovated, every abandoned house he once occupied. And the deeper they looked, the darker the pattern became. Because Morris Solomon wasn't just connected to the victims anymore, he was connected to the places where their bodies were hidden. Which meant police were no longer hunting a suspect. They were hunting a serial killer hiding in plain sight. And they feared the body count was still growing. After Maria Apodaca's body was discovered, detectives launched a full investigation into Morris Solomon's past addresses. What they found shocked even experienced homicide investigators. One property led to another led to shallow graves, and suddenly, Oak Park itself began feeling like a cemetery. At one abandoned house once connected to Solomon, detectives noticed disturbed soil in the backyard. They grabbed shovels and started digging carefully beneath the dirt. Then a human face appeared, partially skeletonized, buried only inches underground. Investigators immediately backed away. Another victim. The body was later identified as 26-year-old Cherie Washington, missing for weeks. But the nightmare wasn't over. At yet another property linked to Solomon, detectives uncovered 2 additional bodies buried in shallow graves. One belonged to Linda Vitella, a woman missing for more than a year. Now police finally understood the horrifying scale of what had been happening inside Oak Park. The killer wasn't panicking after each murder. He was storing bodies near places he lived and worked, as if he believed nobody would ever notice. And for a long time, nobody did. Because the victims came from a forgotten world. Drug addicts, prostitutes. Women society rarely searched for aggressively. Meanwhile, Solomon continued moving freely through the neighborhood, fixing houses, talking calmly with neighbors, even interacting with police. That normal behavior disturbed detectives deeply, because beneath the quiet personality and harmless appearance Investigators now believed they were dealing with a predator capable of killing repeatedly without emotion, and despite mounting suspicion, Morris Solomon still insisted he was innocent, but detectives were finally preparing to stop him before another woman disappeared forever. April 1987. As the sun disappeared behind Sacramento's skyline, police vehicles quietly surrounded another Oak Park property connected to Morris Solomon Jr. This time, detectives weren't searching for graves. They were coming for him. After weeks of surveillance and mounting evidence, investigators believed they finally had enough to make an arrest. Officers approached carefully. Inside the house, Solomon remained strangely calm. No panic. No attempt to escape. When police entered, he surrendered without resistance, almost casually, and that disturbed detectives more than anger ever could. Because by then, investigators believed Solomon had murdered multiple women across Oak Park while living an ordinary life in plain sight, a handyman by day, a predator after dark. But even after his arrest, he denied everything. No confession, no emotion, nothing. Meanwhile, survivors began contacting authorities after seeing media coverage of the case. One woman claimed Solomon had tied her up with electrical cords before assaulting her repeatedly. Another described escaping from his truck after he allegedly threatened her with a knife. Their stories painted a terrifying picture of manipulation and control. Then forensic results finally returned from Yolanda Johnson's murder scene. The DNA evidence matched Morris Solomon. For detectives, it was the final missing piece. After months of circumstantial evidence and buried bodies, science finally connected him directly to one victim. And yet, the deeper investigators looked, the more disturbing the case became. Because several missing women connected to Oak Park were still unaccounted for. No bodies, no graves, no answers, which raised one horrifying question. How many victims had never been found at all? Years later, the trial of Morris Solomon Jr. began inside a Sacramento courtroom. By then, investigators had assembled thousands of documents, witness statements, and forensic reports describing the murders hidden beneath Oak Park's chaos. But when jurors first saw Solomon, many were shocked. He didn't look frightening. He looked quiet, small, almost forgettable. And maybe that was exactly why he had survived for so long. Prosecutors described him as a manipulative predator who targeted vulnerable women trapped by addiction and poverty, women who trusted him because he appeared harmless, women society barely noticed disappearing. Survivors testified about violent assaults involving electrical cords, threats, and terrifying psychological control. Meanwhile, the defense focused on Solomon's traumatic childhood and military experiences during Vietnam. But prosecutors kept returning to one thing: pattern. The same type of victims, the same abandoned houses, the same bindings, the same shallow graves, again and again. After days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty, multiple murder convictions. A death sentence followed. And yet, even after sentencing, Morris Solomon continued denying responsibility. No apology, no explanation, no confession, which left detectives haunted by one final possibility: that the official number of victims might never tell the full story. Because even today, some women connected to Oak Park during that period remain missing. And perhaps the most disturbing truth of all: the killer never looked like a monster. He looked like someone you would walk past without noticing. Quiet, polite, ordinary, until the bodies started appearing beneath the ground.